Welcome to today's edition of Solutions Everyday Live. Of course, I'm Elliot Connie, and today was a super exciting day. It was day 2 of the level 2 of my organization, Solution Focused Certification Training. And also, it's the day before I'm going to make a major announcement right here on my Facebook page. Like tomorrow, at 4 p.m. Central Time, I'm going to make an announcement that is literally game-changing. Like, people are often like, I'm going to say something really cool and I'm so excited. This is not just excitement for me. Like, I'm genuinely excited for you and the field. But today, what's on my mind is George Floyd and the death of George Floyd, which happened 1 year ago today. Like, I will never, ever, ever forget what happened and the impact of the death of George Floyd on my life, on the world, and on the solution-focused field. A year ago today, we were all stuck in our homes. The pandemic was just kind of ramping up, and we were in the first wave. We're now in like the 7th wave, but we were in the first wave, and you couldn't go to the grocery store. I mean, it was just such a crazy time. And I remember just scrolling on Facebook, and someone had posted a video of George Floyd being kneeled on by a police officer. And I watched probably the first 20 seconds of this video before realizing what it was. And then I couldn't watch it. To this day, I've not seen the entire video. It was just too much for me. And I remember a couple of weeks later talking to my mother, and my mother was just so worried about her son. My mother was so worried about what was going on in the world. And my mother lives in Chicago and I live in Texas, and there were riots and crazy things going on. And I ended up renting a car and driving to Chicago because my mother was talking about, she wanted to know her children and her sons, my mother's 3 boys, were safe. And I just wanted to hug my mom. So I drove 1,000 miles for a hug. But what happened in the weeks and months since has completely changed the solution-focused field. And believe it or not, it all started with the murder of George Floyd. So I want to take you back a bit. So those of you who know me know, I am not one to be easily pushed around or to be quiet while injustices are happening. And for many, many years, I've been telling people that there is racism, there's oppression, and there is bigotry in the field of solution-focused brief therapy and in some of the organizations that are prominent in the field of solution-focused brief therapy. And I have been subjected to some of this racism and bigotry, and I thought it was unfair, I thought it was wrong, and I fought against it for much of my career. And I think what happens is if you are not black, and if you are not brown, and if you are not an overt minority, when someone tells you that there is racism and someone tells you there is injustice and someone tells you there's bigotry, you have a tendency to look around and see if you see it. But the truth is, unless you look like me and unless you are an African American, unless you are black and brown, you don't really see it. So for years, I would tell people this is happening, and people would say, well, we don't really see it. We feel bad that you're experiencing these difficulties, and we feel bad that you're saying these difficult things, but we don't really see it. And when George Floyd was murdered, I got an influx of emails from people saying, because it happened on camera and it happened in an undeniable way, we have a better understanding of what is happening and the wrongs that black and brown people deal with. And people were asking me, so what can we do as a field to make it better? And what ended up happening was huge amounts of people started holding these organizations and these people accountable for their behaviors and choices. And what ended up happening was being a racist all of a sudden became uncool, unpopular, and people became unwilling to sweep racism under the rug. I don't know if you guys remember or not, but there was a time in 2020 where we were listening to one another differently than I, as a black person, have ever experienced. People were listening, giving credence to what minorities were saying instead of judgment, criticism, and defensiveness. People were listening to the reports that people like me were making instead of questioning the reports that people were making. The world had shifted. And as a result, organizations came to me, like now I'm like the leader in this field, and I've got the biggest following in this field, and I've had the biggest impact in this field. And these organizations are coming to me and they're saying, we want to do better and make up for the wrongs that we have participated in the past. What can we do? And I would say, well, one of the things you should do is include minorities. And one of the things you should do is your upcoming event, recognize the contribution of Black and brown people. And one of the things you should do is be overt about how people can become a board member and how people can become a contributor in your organization. We have to fight injustice with transparency, with justice, with equality, with equity. And in doing so, a lot of these organizations have shifted, and their events look different in 2020. I was asked to sit on multiple boards, and it was a hard process. And I said, I will only do it if we can have overt conversations about what it will look like going forward, and what it will look like, and how you be anti-racist, and how you be pro-social justice, and how you become advocates instead of silent. You know, I often believe that silence is the weapon of oppression. Silence is the sickness that keeps bigotry and all these things going on. And we're going to address these things overtly. And a lot of these organizations hung in there, and they had those hard conversations and made those hard changes. And I now sit on multiple boards of organizations that worked really hard to keep me out for many years. And as I sit back and reflect on that now, a year after George Floyd's murder, you know, I hate when people say, you know, George Floyd gave his life and we appreciate. He didn't give his life. It was taken from him. But I still have to acknowledge that had that moment not happened, I'm not sure the shift in the solution-focused field would have happened. I'm not sure the shift in this world would have happened, because I'm not sure we would have had the space where we were listening to each other differently, and where we were able to connect in a way that in my 44 years of life, I have not experienced. So one time when a Black or brown person said, I'm experiencing racism, bigotry, oppression, I'm experiencing injustice, it was not met with defensiveness or explaining or questioning. It was met with support. And all of a sudden it just became uncool to have an organization being all white and all male. It became uncool. I remember in the middle of this, there was an organization, I don't remember the name of the organization, I wish I had, because I remember this moment very clearly. But there was a moment in 2020 where there was a panel put together about women's health. And the man, I wish I remember this, but the flyer for this panel was 4 doctors, 4 male white doctors. And the public pushback was like, how can you have a panel, an event about women's health, and your 4 prominent speakers that you're marketing on your flyer are all white males? And the organization that did that was forced to change that event and put women on the panel. And 2020 was the year it became uncool, unpopular to simply feature white males. You had to recognize diversity, you had to respect diversity, and you had to be equitable, and you had to have a social justice component, and you had to have a plan to address this world that we live in. Now look, there is still a lot of work to do. There's still a lot of work to do as it relates to gender equality. There's still a lot of work to do as it relates to racial equality. There's still a lot of work to do as it relates to ethnic equality. I mean, we have a lot of work to do in this world. But I just wanted to take a moment here and recognize that George Floyd's murder was the flashpoint that led to a lot of changes. And had that not happened, I'm not sure the solution-focused field would have made the adjustments that it's now made, because now, in 2020, for the very first time, there are 3 African-American board members on the board of the Solution-Focused Brief Therapy Association for the very first time. That organization spent years not having Black and brown people on their board, and spent years without transparency on how someone can become on that board. They spent years in a dysfunctional way, not allowing people who look like me to have access to these positions. And in 2020, that organization elected its first black and brown people, one of them being me. And those changes would not have happened if not for George Floyd. I probably got, when this happened in the subsequent weeks after the passing of George Floyd, after the murder of George Floyd, I probably got 100 emails, maybe more. I mean, I got a ton of emails from people in this field apologizing for their conduct over the years because they didn't recognize what they were doing was participating in an oppressive system. I got a bunch of emails from people not just apologizing for their behavior, but apologizing for their silence while other people were behaving differently, because that moment was like, this is what we have been talking about for a very long time. And here it is in an extreme way on camera, on video. And without having these examples, people tend to not believe us when we say we're experiencing injustice, racism, bigotry, and oppression. I was shocked and hurt for many, many years because I wouldn't have thought that a group of people in the psychotherapy helping field would have been so hurtful, racist, bigoted, oppressive. I would have never thought it. I would have never thought that people within the helping profession who claim to be solution focused, which is all about thinking positively and believing in people and giving people your best thoughts and thinking people are amazing, would have ever been this way. But they were. I think people are people. And wherever there is people, there are injustices. And wherever there's injustice, we need to fight and be anti-racist. And that fight continues and that fight persists. And I'm happy to stay on the front line of that fight. I'm happy to stay engaged in that fight. I'm happy to continue to work to make this happen. But just for 1 second, I wanted to take a moment and realize what a year it has been since George Floyd's murder. And that event has triggered changes all around the world, including the solution-focused field. So as we think about the changes we want going forward in the community that we want to create going forward, I think we have to take a moment, like a moment of silence, and recognize that without this tragic loss, that should never have happened, without this tragic loss, that should never have been a part of the world. Without that tragic event, changes in our field would have never happened. And I think we owe George Floyd to continue and to persist in the direction of justice. I think we owe George Floyd to continue to work and honor these changes. It should have never taken a murder to get here. But since it did, we owe this person everything. And I certainly am going to do everything I can to live up to that and behave in a way that honors his life and that makes his death not as pointless. And I think as much as like these organizations have been hurtful to me, and as much as it would have been easy to be like, when they asked me to sit on their boards and when they asked me to contribute, it would have been easy to be like, screw you guys were horrible to me, I'm out of here. But I had to do the difficult thing and the soul searching and say, if I do that, if I just screw you guys, I'm out of here, I'm going to be selfish and focus on my own business and my own professional identity. I wouldn't be honoring the people who came before me. And I almost say like the people who sacrificed, but it's not a sacrifice, it was taken from him. But even though it was taken from him, his life was taken from him, I now have a debt to him, and I will live up to that debt to the best of my ability. And I think in this day, 1 year away, it's time to reflect and see we have a super long way to go, but some changes have happened that I think are quite substantive, and we owe George Floyd to continue that fight. So I want you guys to join me in that fight. I want you guys to stay in there and continue to listen to people who look different from you and who have a different background from you. I want you to continue to care. I want you to continue to be anti-racist, which is different than not racist. When you're anti-racist, you don't sit silently in the presence when oppressive practices are taking place. I want us to continue and engage in hard conversations, because the only way change happens is we have hard conversations. And I want to encourage all of you to stay in there. I want to encourage all of you to do the best you can. I want to encourage all of you to be willing to be uncomfortable, because the only way that we get to where we should be is if we're willing to be uncomfortable together. So anyway, thank you for watching this video. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel. Like I said, tomorrow I'm gonna be making a major announcement. I cannot wait to share it with you guys. Tomorrow is gonna be a super duper exciting day. Like this page, head on over to my YouTube channel and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Tomorrow's gonna be a new day, but for today, I just wanted to take a moment and recognize how we got to where we are and George Floyd's contribution to that journey. See you tomorrow.